A lot of people are complaining about Ghost Recon Breakpoint, Ubisoft's next attempt at an open-world military shooter. While some criticism is justified, a lot of arguments that people have are due to complete unawareness, or they just hate it because of microtransactions, and they nitpick every little thing even if they would praise it in any other game. Let's make a few things clear. The game is quite buggy. Nothing game-breaking, it's mostly the animations. You'll see your character hitting the air or an invisible wall while sliding. Some other funny UB bugs, the usual. But there's also quite a few places where genuine effort was put into. I'll talk about that later. First, I'd like to talk about the alleged pay-to-win. The game launched with some outrageous microtransactions, and there's a possibility they'll come back at some point. When it comes to skill points alone, that is something they removed from the store, there's a couple of ways you can get them. First of all, just leveling up. You play the game, kill enemies, finish missions, you level up, you get skill points. Easy. Another way is through rewards for completing certain missions, both in PvE and PvP. Yet another is through leveling up a class. Right now there's 4 classes you can choose from, and each class has special tasks to complete, for which you level up the class itself and get rewards. For each level you get a point. There's 9 points you can get if you max out a class, so there's 36 points from that alone. And the tasks at the beginning are pretty easy. Another way you can get them is from certain camps, and always from behemoth areas. If you're low level or can't or don't want to battle the behemoth, you can just sneak in, get the points, get whatever else he's guarding, usually a weapon blueprint, get out of there, you're done. So there's 4 ways to get skill points I just mentioned. Sure, there's also the 5th, kinda, as you could buy skill points through microtransactions, but that's still 4 to 1. Right now I have every skill unlocked and still have 64 points left. That's how easy it is to get those. Being able to buy skill points for real money is still a terrible offer, don't get me wrong. But I wouldn't call it a pay-to-win in this game. I've already mentioned behemoth areas, and from those you can get blueprints for weapons. You also get those from certain camps and missions, just like the skill points. I personally don't think any of the weapons is a must-have. In the end, it's up to preference. Maybe there's some meta in PvP, but I wouldn't know. Either way, I don't think you can call it pay-to-win if you choose to buy the blueprints. Don't get me wrong, it's a terrible microtransactions offer, but it's not pay to win. Speaking of weapons, people seem not to like the loot system, or rather the gear score system. I'll try to explain as best and quick as I can, and tell you why I think it's actually a pretty good system. Right now there's 4 tiers of loot, 5 if you count boss weapons, but there's not many of those and they're nothing special. There's the standard weapons, that give you no additional stats, and then advanced, high-end, and elite, which give you additional stats such as faster reload or better accuracy. You can upgrade each weapon with parts you get from dismantling weapons you don't need or want, which the game is generous with, and there's 3 levels of upgrade. Each level gives you passive abilities, which is something that works in PvP, so you could argue that being able to buy upgrade parts is pay to win. But frankly, it's really easy to get all those parts you need just through playing the game, and you don't really need to grind for it. Personally, I've at no point thought of needing any time savers. It's still a terrible microtransactions offer, don't get me wrong, but it's not pay to win. Anyway, your gear also has a gear score. This only really acts as a barrier against certain missions and drone camps. Basically, if your level is too low, it'll be easier for you to die. Often you'll get one-shot killed. And you'll deal very little damage to enemies, though that's mostly an issue against drones because you can kill human enemies with a single headshot. Aside from that, The gear score does nothing. You can be level 200 and play co-op or in PvP with someone who's level 10, and you'll both be fine. In co-op, the higher level would have a bit of an advantage because of the additional attributes from the better tiered loot, but that's pretty much it. You cannot buy better gear with real money. You get it only by actually playing the game. In Wildlands, this worked a bit different. You'd loot specific weapons from specific places and you just use those throughout the game. Basically, you didn't really have to change the weapons. And guess what? I personally didn't. In Wildlands, I got a few weapons I was interested in, and I never really experimented with anything else because there was no incentive to do so. In Breakpoint, you get random gear, so at some point you'll have some weapon you normally wouldn't use, but it's 10 levels higher than your current one, and gosh darn it, you want that number to be higher no matter what. So you equip the weapon and you use it. That's at least how it was for me. I've tried most weapons in the game only because the gear score exists. In Wildlands, I haven't even tried most. In case you're wondering, I haven't used shotguns much. I'm just not a fan of those in games like these. In Breakpoint, there's also gear you wear. So headwear, handwear, vests, pants, and footwear. Their tiers work just like the weapons, but you can't upgrade them, at least not yet. You can get crafting materials when you dismantle them, but there doesn't seem to be any use for them yet. These act as an RPG mechanic to create proper builds with the stat boost they offer. For example, you can get up to 40% injury resistance if you have it on all gear parts. I did some research, and in Gold tier or Elite, there's 21 different combinations for headwear, handwear, vests, and pants, and 28 combinations for footwear. Mind you, the buffs from the gear doesn't work in PvP, so it doesn't really matter what you wear, it's only PvE. So both the weapon stats and gear stats are part of the looter-shooter mechanic. I understand how some people may not like this, being in a Ghost Recon game, but for what it is, I think it's done well enough. It creates a simple gameplay loop that I personally enjoy, at least. One of the other arguments that people have is that the world is empty and there's nothing to do. I've discovered as much of the map as I could, and I believe I have every point of interest on the map at this point. Every one of these dots had at the very least one item crate. Sure, not every point of interest is actually interesting. There's a lot of places which are just copy-pasted buildings, but there's also some cool places like ruins and caves which are unique. So if you like exploring, this world has quite a bit of variety to offer. Most enemy camps are also quite unique. While they're built mostly from the same assets, the layout is always different, and it actually makes some encounters memorable. At some point you'll have a faction mission in one of the camps you've already been to, and you'll go, oh, I remember this place, I like it, or I hate it, for whatever reason. In the end, of course, the game is just another open world shooter, so aside from exploring and shooting at people, there's not much more to do. Obviously, Breakpoint isn't for everyone, just like any other game. When it comes to the game's story, yeah, it's nothing special, but it's also not terrible. The one thing I really liked is that the cutscenes take into account whether or not you killed the main bad guy of the game. That's actually a detail some devs tend to omit, so I'd say that it's a good thing Ubisoft hasn't. But yes, I've heard people say that it's dumb, though I'm sure they'd praise it if it was in, say, a Kojima game. Like I've mentioned in the beginning though, people really like to nitpick when it comes to this game. They take any details that may be good and turn it around for the hell of it. And the last quick one, vehicle handling in Breakpoint is actually pretty good. There's some that handle better, there's some that handle worse. But it's not terrible, and it's an improvement from Wildlands. I think these were the major arguments people had against Breakpoint. Hopefully you understand my reasoning. At the very least, we can agree to disagree. I totally understand why people may dislike the mechanics or think the bugs are breaking the immersion or whatever. I just don't think the game deserves as much crap as it received. If the poor sales of the game make Ubisoft put more effort into Breakpoint and their other upcoming games, That's all the better, of course. If anything comes from this, I really hope it's at least better experience for the end user. Now is the part of the video I would like to call the effort appreciation moments. I'll show you a couple of small things you may not have noticed or you may not have known about if you haven't played a game. I would at least like you to know that there still was some genuine effort put into the game, even if the overall experience isn't satisfactory to some, or most. Breakpoint is full of fast travel locations you can unlock, where you set up bivouacs. In bivouacs you can buy things, get buffs, and summon vehicles. If you select a non-camouflaged vehicle, i.e. a standard one, there's a chance it'll spawn in camo fitting to the place you're at. Sometimes the camo will seem off place, or you won't get camo at all, but more often than not, I've noticed that I got fitting camo. Speaking of camo, something they promoted a lot in the trailers was the prone camo mechanic. Depending on the surface you do that on, there's different animation, so dirt or dust will be different from mud and grass, etc. In mud, which by the way you leave imprints in, the character will smear their face, and in grass they'll just lay on their side. Speaking of dirt, that works really nicely as well. If you crouch, you'll get dirt on your knee. If you're prone, you'll get dirt on your front side. And if you shake your butt, you'll get it dirty. Another cool little thing is sliding. It can be really annoying, and it can be buggy, sure. But did you know that there's a sliding animation for when you're mid-weapon switch? Someone had to program this in, and seeing as the character switches weapons pretty quickly and the timing to achieve this is really tight, that's a nice little detail. In some places there's civilians, there's a lot less than in Wildlands, and understandably that makes the world seem a bit lifeless. But when you do find them, you can have some fun. If you have a mission where you need to get information from a civilian and you haven't alerted the enemies, you can sneak up on a person and ask them for the info. The moment they realize you're armed, they flinch. You also seem to throw their expensive tablets on the ground, which obviously is a feature. Clocks work and show in-game time. Some clocks don't work at all. If you don't see the minute hand moving, it's just a broken clock. But those that do work show the time correctly. Sometimes the enemy AI can be really terrible, but at points it can surprise you, and there's a few really neat mechanics. When they spot a player, they need to shout or radio the others before everyone goes on full alert. And the enemies don't magically know where all the players are once alerted, which is quite an improvement over Wildlands. That is all I have to say for the time being. I've probably missed something. Again, I hope you understand my reasoning. I'm not saying that the game is groundbreaking, but it's not that bad.